Well, good morning. How we doing? Good, good. Hey, happy Thanksgiving to you all. I want to hear a little bit of how your Thanksgiving went, so I just need a little bit of help. Ken, I need you to come up here, brother. Come up here. Kevin, just because you're sitting in front row. Don't ever sit front row, by the way, ever. Kevin, come up here. Come here. Jump up here. You got it. All right, so I just need a little help hearing how your Thanksgiving went, but here's the deal. Ken, I need you to tell me how Kevin's Thanksgiving went. If you can, just, I don't know, just go for it. Do your best.
I think Kevin didn't eat a whole lot. I don't know how Kevin's Thanksgiving went.
What do you mean? Try a little bit.
You watched football. You like the Bears. No?
No, all right, that's close. I can't, explain a little bit. What happened for your Christmas, or your Thanksgiving?
You know, we had screaming kids. We had some great food, a lot of family over. 2 turkeys, one didn't get touched, so we got leftovers if you're hungry.
That's the best, by the way, right? Anyone else? Uh-huh.
And a couple dishes that you just don't touch, but you try to make it look like someone had something from it, you know?
Wait, who makes those dishes? No, I was kidding. Don't answer that. Thanks, guys. Give me a hand. Kevin, you were about to say who did that, too. That would have been unwise. Hey, I had these guys come up for a reason. Today, we're going to be in Mark chapter 4. And there's something really cool that Mark does. And I wanted to kind of illustrate it that way because you could see kind of firsthand what that looks like. That the way Mark communicates as if he was the one that saw all these things. First person. I mean, he writes it with such detail that it's like him actually being there. And the reason I say that is because as he writes it, he's not the first person there. He's not there. He hears these stories from Peter. He hears them from Paul. He hears them from people around him, such as Barnabas and things like that. But he's actually not there. He's the one recording, and he writes it down as he hears it, but he's not there. But he writes it down with such incredible detail that you're like, holy cow, this guy must have been there. And I wanted to point that out because in the same way, Ken's like, I don't know, maybe you watched some football, and maybe you ate some turkey. That's how you would describe if you didn't really know. But as soon as I handed the microphone to Kevin, what did he say? He said things like, well, the kids, right? He talked about his kids. And he said, well, I had 2 turkeys, and we had the sides. And details are in all of Mark's writings. And again, writing more for what Jesus did and less about what he said, he still has an incredible amount of detail in when it comes to actually what he did. So I told you we'd be in Mark chapter 4. We're going to be in verses 35 through 41. But we're going to read 35 to 37 now, and then we're going to unpack as we go along. It's kind of how we've been doing this series in Mark. Now, I told you if you're new with us, you should know that we're going to go all the way through the book of Mark, which is really, really cool, but we're going to do it in 3 parts. So we did 1 part this year. We're going to do 2 parts next year at different times and kind of keep packing through it and really investigating what Mark has to say and what he's recording. It's really, really cool. So that's what we're doing. But if you have your Bible, open it up to Mark chapter 4. Again, we're going to look at 35 through 37. And I want you, again, to pay attention to the detail because there's so much detail in what Mark records. Look at verse 35. It says, that day, when evening came, there's detail right there, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. And a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And the disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? Now, a little bit of background. Right before this, now, Doug spoke last week. He talked about the parable of the seeds. He talked about the good soil and the hard soil and the crowded soil. If you guys remember that. If you weren't with us, that was a great message. Go online and watch it. But one of the things that kind of happens here is Jesus, he's giving all sorts of parables, all sorts of teachings. They're really a focus, by the way, on seeds and kind of what that means and planting and having foundation, which is really cool. But he's tired. That's kind of what I gather. How cool is it, by the way, that Jesus gets tired? I don't know about you. There's something about that for me that I'm like, that's cool. Do you guys get tired? How many of us are just kind of even tired right now? I'm tired. My 5-year-old woke me up at 4:30 a.m., said her legs hurt, and I couldn't go back to bed. How cool is it that Jesus gets tired. And so he's tired. Why is he tired? Because he's been preaching, he's been doing miracles, he's been traveling. He is absolutely exhausted. Exhausted. And so his disciples, who I think is pretty cool, they, I think, are aware of this. They see that Jesus is tired. They get him just as he was in the boat. They push off, and they let Jesus take a nap. How many of us could use a nap right now? All right? I think that's just so cool, the detail, again, that's in this writing. But something profound happens here. Again, Jesus in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples wake him up because of this squall, this storm going on around. And what do they say to him? Good morning, Jesus. Hey, how are you, bud? Hey, by the way, there's a small little storm going on around. We might sink. You mind if you get up and just, help us out here a little bit? No, they don't say that. What do they say? Teacher, we're going to drown. Don't you care if we die? Look, this is what happens when fear starts to set into our lives. When fear comes in, we begin to kind of point finger, and then we begin to accuse. Look, we can't accuse when our faith begins to be overwhelmed by fear. And you guys have experienced this before, right? I mean, how many of us have been afraid before? And it's easy to point the finger. It's easy to get mad at someone else. Let me give an example. Any other husbands out there find complete elation, joy, euphoria in scaring your wives? Any other husbands out there? Am I the only one, right? I don't know what it is. If I'm having a bad day, I want to go scare Danae, all right? It's just my favorite thing to do. So I go up behind her. This happened just this last week, right? She's in the kitchen. She's, doing her thing, and she has no clue that I'm even around. And I go up behind her, and at the same time, I scream and grab her sides, and she jumps up, and we have like one of those kitchen counters, right? And she's right in the corner. She jumps and then turns to run, but then runs into the cabinet. I fall down laughing because it's hilarious. She turns and looks at me with demon eyes. I mean, hateful eyes. And I can't go anything but what did I do wrong? I just scared you. I didn't make you run into that cabinet. I didn't make you do that. All right, maybe I'm to blame a little bit, all right? But that's how fear works, and sometimes that's how we react. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. When fear comes in and we're overwhelmed by fear and our faith gets overwhelmed, we kind of point the finger and accuse other people around us. We're quick to blame. And that's exactly what happens here with these disciples. Did Jesus have anything to do with the storm? No. It's a storm. It happened on the Sea of Galilee all the time. That lake, they always had, some sort of storm. Look it up. But the disciples, they look at Jesus, and the first thing they do is they accuse him. They accuse him. Don't you care if we die? How many know that sarcasm is never a good way to communicate? It's never a good way to communicate. I don't struggle with sarcasm. That was sarcastic. You get that, Matt? Yeah, you did. Look, we also joke in my family that you've heard of the 5 love languages. My family has 6, and the last one's sarcasm. That's how we communicate. It's my favorite way to communicate. It's not a good way to communicate, but I still love it. I don't know if I give it up. Pray for me. So, sarcasm is just never good. And that's what's cool, too. Again, I just want to keep pulling you back to the details of Mark. Mark keeps coming back to details, saying, look, they're being sarcastic here, which is what happens to you and I when we get fearful and when we get angry and lots of other emotions. We are sarcastic with one another, and it's not a good way to communicate. And I honestly believe this sets Jesus off into a little bit of a bad mood. Now, it doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible, so don't kind of hold me to that. I love putting myself in the Word of God. I love kind of going, I wonder how Jesus felt. I wonder how the disciples felt, and trying to feel what they were going through. But I think that this put Jesus a little bit in a bad mood, and I'll show you why in just a second. But when they accuse, and by the way, this is the first thing they do when he's waking up from a nap. Does anyone like being woken up from a nap? Okay, so there's my proof right there that Jesus was probably grumpy anyways. Again, how cool is it that Jesus gets grumpy? But sarcasm's never a good way to communicate. Never. And we can't confuse peace with apathy. We can't confuse the peace that Jesus is feeling with the other emotion that the disciples likely are feeling, which is, Jesus, are you being apathetic? Don't you even care? Don't you care about me, Jesus? Now, maybe we haven't been in that situation before, but I bet you a good portion, if not the majority of this room, has said that to Jesus, has said that to God. In a situation, a scenario in your life, I bet you've gone, come on, God, don't you even care about me? Don't you even care that I'm going through this? Don't you even care that I have to live through that? Don't you even care that that happened to that person or this happening to me? God, are you even there? Don't you care if I die? Don't you care if I live? Don't you care if I'm happy? I mean, haven't we said that before? I know I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of that. We can't confuse the peace that Jesus is feeling with the apathy that the disciples are feeling. I remember when my wife and we went to Brazil on a mission trip in 2016 of April. And on our way there, we were with a really cool missionary. His name is Mark Lemos. And this guy was just adventurous, really cool guy. We're still friends and talk often. When we went there, we landed in Manaus, and then we took a 15-hour boat ride in this big riverboat, kind of think New Orleans riverboat, right? And it was 15 hours to a village called Sumauma. So on our way there, we traveled pretty much at night, and when we slept, they were still going so that when we woke up, we'd pretty much be there. But we're all excited. It's our first night. And I have one of those flashlights that you could like zoom in and zoom out, and you could really kind of see everything. And so I'm just watching the water line, and all I see is eyeballs, just right above the water. And about another 20 yards later, just eyeballs. And another 20 yards later, eyeballs. And just all the way down the river, I'm just seeing these eyeballs and eyeballs and eyeballs. So we get to the village, we build a church, it's really, really cool. And then when it's time to go home, so we were there 5 days. When it's time to go home, Mark says, all right, guys, so who wants to jump off the 3-story riverboat into the Amazon River? And I had a feeling in that moment of, don't you even care if I die? Because all I see are eyeballs like this. That's my wife next to the black caiman that we killed and ate, all right? And then Mark was telling us also, so you want to be careful of the black caiman. They're there. Also want to be careful of the snakes. That was a snake that I found. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't find it. They did this really cool traveling zoo where other boats would come alongside you. It was weird, but that was really cool. But that was still in the water, so that's freaky. But then Mark said, okay, guys, just awareness. So if you decide to jump in the Amazon, just so you know, if you have an open wound or a cut or anything like that, you probably don't want to jump in because the piranha will get you. Oh, joy, right? And then he said one last thing that was kind of like threw it over the top. He said, also, you want to avoid peeing in the water because there's a parasite that's attracted to warm water and will swim upstream. And we're like, well, who wouldn't want to do this? I mean, this is going to be amazing. But I remember getting that feeling of like, how could you, what? Aren't you supposed to care for me? Like, you're the missionary here. I think one of your goals is to make sure none of us die. None of us die. But of course, if you know my personality, we had to jump in.
What?
That jump was kind of the culmination of that whole trip for me. If I'm honest with you, I was fearful of the trip for a couple things. I'd never been afraid to go on any trip in my life. But for whatever reason, this trip was a little different because my wife and I were going. So there was this fear of what would happen if both of us died, if something happened. And that was like literally an overwhelming fear. And it sat with us from the moment we put the deposit in to the moment that we got home, was this fear. Because fear is really interesting, isn't it? fear could absolutely either paralyze you or it could spark something powerful in you. And for these disciples, I think that's exactly what Jesus is trying to get to. Like if you look a little bit further on, like let's read. Look at verse 39. So then, Jesus got woken up from his nap by the disciples being sarcastic. Don't you even care if we die? And he says, he got up, he rebuked, that's a key word to why I believe he's a little bit grumpy, okay? He rebuked the wind and the waves and said, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you," what's the word? No, come on, church, what is it? No, the word before afraid. Well, why are you so? That's a really interesting word that Mark's put in there. I mean, that's some serious detail. I mean, if I were writing, I might say, "Why are you afraid?" But when I ask you, well, let me say this. Do you remember the last time you were afraid? Afraid. Somebody ran a red light, almost hit you. Like, you remember the last time you were afraid? Do you remember the last time you were so afraid? There's a difference there, isn't there? That word "so" is really interesting. That you are so afraid. And then he goes on and says, do you still have no faith? These guys have seen powerful things. They've seen Jesus heal. They've seen Jesus do miracles. They've seen people, like literally, like demons cast out of them. They've seen Jesus do amazing, miraculous, crazy, awesome things. And Jesus, and again, this is why I think he's a little bit grumpy. First, he rebukes, which is a powerful word. To rebuke something is powerful. So, that maybe that's not proof. But then he says, "Quiet, be still." Instead of like, "Hey, can you just chill out a little bit? Chill, you're right." But then he goes, "Why are you so afraid? What is wrong? Where's your faith? Come on, guys. You've seen me do powerful things." But these guys are afraid. Look, the opposite of faith is fear. Maybe you're going, "Wait, hold on a second. I don't know if I agree with that. I've always thought the opposite of faith is doubt." No. The opposite of faith is fear. Look, faith is trusting God enough to do what he says. That's what faith is. Faith has action behind it. Faith is not just a belief. Faith does. It moves. It has this movement behind an action that you and I, we have to do if we're going to have genuine faith. Now, the opposite of belief is doubt, but the opposite of faith is fear. And faith, though, of course, it has aspects of belief, it is not all-encompassing until you add belief and action. That's what equals faith. And so, for Jesus, I believe that these guys, they believe in him. They've seen these things. I just don't know if their belief has actually moved into faith. And I'm not trying to get stuck on semantics here at all. And I don't even really know if the Bible differentiates between faith and belief. So kind of hold that in tension with me just for a second. But I believe that it's very clear, James talks about it, that faith without action is what? Dead. You can't do anything with it. What good is it to have faith if you don't have any movement, if you're not doing anything with your faith? You may have belief, but you don't have faith. And maybe for you today, you're like, boom, mind blown. Because I believe with all my heart that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I believe that he died for me. I believe that he rose again, but I'm struggling with my faith. Maybe that's where you're at. So I guess my challenge would be, what's next? Not that we have to earn our salvation. I'm not saying that, okay? The Bible's very clear. Believe in your heart, confess with your mouth, Jesus, Lord, you will be saved. It's not a salvation issue. It's a movement issue. It's a power issue. It's a boredom issue. Are you bored in your belief right now? Maybe you're here at church. Maybe you grew up in church, and the only reason you're here is because there's a family member that said, hey, let's go to church. And so you're here, and you've believed, but you don't really have faith. Look, faith takes action. And so I guess my challenge again would be to you, take some action. Take some action. I believe there's an appropriate amount of testing God. He talks about it in Micah. He talks about it in finances, but that's action. There's an appropriate amount of, hey, God, I'm going to step out in faith. Would you do something with me? There's an appropriate amount of that where you're testing God a little bit. God, would you use me? Because I know there's all sorts of things that we need to step out in faith with. I know there's things like new roles in our workplace, maybe a promotion that we're trying to strive for, or maybe a new job. Maybe it's confrontation, that you need to have a little bit more faith, take some action, believing that God is going to use you, specifically if you do it in love. But maybe there's confrontation, there's someone you need to approach and say, hey, look, this is something that's going on. But you don't have enough faith in what God's doing in and through you to approach. And so because of that, it's stagnant, and that relationship is broken at best, if not wounded or maybe even dead. There's all sorts of areas that we could step out in faith and take action. Maybe there's a son or daughter that you have they're adults now, and maybe there's some things that were said that were things you wish never would have came out of your mouth or out of their mouth. Maybe that faith piece is stepping out and asking for forgiveness, even if maybe you weren't the one that wounded. Look, it takes two to tango. The Bible even talks about that in Matthew 18. It says that when you have an issue with somebody, that you would go and that you resolve that issue with that person first. And that's not just if they have an issue with you, well, it's their responsibility to come to me. No, it's not. No, it's not. The Bible doesn't say that. It says it's reciprocal. If there's an issue and you know there's an issue, then you solve it between you and that person. Then if you can't solve it between that person, you bring another person in, and you can't do that, and it talks about bringing the church in. But you solve it. There's all sorts of areas that we need to step out in faith, but we need to understand that fear is always going to be a factor in it. It's always going to be a factor, and it's going to be a factor in the season. Again, the holiday season's kind of a really hard time. I know for a lot of us, it's joyful. We look forward to it. It's great, but for a lot of other of us, it's not. It's really hard. And so that faith piece, again, it's even, we struggle with the fear of like, I don't want to get together with my family because it keeps bringing up emotions of people that are not here anymore. I don't have my spouse anymore. I don't have my sister anymore. I don't have my brother anymore. I'm fighting with that. And it brings up this fear inside of you. And you don't look forward to the holiday seasons anymore. Fear is always going to be a factor. And God knows this about you and I. That's what's really cool. Actually, the Bible talks over 70 times. It says this phrase, ready? Do not be afraid. 70 times. Do you believe that God knows that fear is a part of our life? And that if we don't do something about the fear that paralyzes, then you're probably always going to be frustrated in your relationship with God and your relationship with others. And so then Mark goes on, and he records 39 through 40. Look at verse 41 now. He says they were, what's the word? Terrified. That's a weird word, Mark. Wait, hold on. They woke Jesus up. They said, Jesus, we're going to drown if you don't do something. Jesus wakes up. He calms the wind and the waves. And you would think at this point the disciples would be like, you're awesome, Jesus. Thanks, man. And they would be elated and they'd be so excited. And this is awesome. What's the words they used here? They were terrified. That doesn't even make sense. Why would you be scared? Jesus did what you asked him to do. Because not all fear is bad. Because not all fear is bad. They were terrified, and they asked each other, who the heck is this? Who is this person? And again, mind you, they had seen the miracles. They'd seen all sorts of incredible things, but it was always with animate objects. And this is the first time Jesus had power, or they saw Jesus had power over wind and waves. Who are you? See, not all fear, again, is bad. There's good kind of fear. It's the kind of fear that I wonder if we've had that kind of encounter with God, where we've gotten to that place where we go, holy cow, you are God. You really are powerful. You really do have control. You really are God. And maybe some of you are stuck on that word fear. Let me replace it. Respect. Awe. Holy cow. That kind of fear is what the disciples experience in this moment. Jesus, you are the Messiah. You are the one we've been reading about. See, here's my challenge. Regardless of where you're at in your relationship with God, whether you're maybe here and you haven't even begun it yet, or maybe you've been a Christ follower for years, maybe you have a PhD in theology, I don't care. The challenge is the same. That you and I, we need to move our belief toward faith. And this isn't just a one-time thing. It's not a check in the box of Christianity that you would check. This is something that you and I honestly have to do probably, maybe even daily, certainly seasonally. Because I don't know about you, raising kids for me was different when they were younger than now when they're in elementary. It's just different. I need a different kind of faith. I know, talking to some of you who have adult children, that having adult children maybe is even harder parenting than having young 2 or 3-year-olds. Because now you can't tell them what to do, and you've done your best to raise them, but they're making their own choices. That's hard. And so your belief in God, that he died for you, Jesus was sent, he was resurrected, maybe moving that belief to faith in your season looks different. And I think that's only something you can answer. So would you bow your heads and close your eyes? I just want to pray for us. Father, thank you that you are God, that you are in control. And Lord, I know that each of us have our own story. We're going through our own thing, and even in seasons where things are great, I believe moving our belief toward faith is something that you constantly ask us to do, that we would respond in action, we would respond knowing that you are in control, that you are God. And so, Lord, I pray that whatever the situation, the scenario, the season of life that we're in right now, wherever perhaps we feel stagnant, or maybe, Lord, we feel like we are so on fire for you, that you would continue to move us toward faith that would inspire, not just ourselves, but would inspire others. That we would be so moved by you, so in awe by you, so just in respect of you, that we'd want to respond with our lives. In every aspect of our lives, from private living to public living, that it would all be the same because you're God, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We would be that kind of consistent in our faith. So Lord, if those of us are struggling, if we're here, would you be present? Show us what that next step means. Show us how to live out our faith. Help us to become less stagnant, more movement. In Jesus' name. Amen? Amen.